Hi, I want to talk about the proposition that you can't learn shibari from video. A number of people have said this online, and let's look at the alternatives, the other ways you can learn. Obviously, the first way, and the way that most people seem to suggest, is real life. And I'd agree, real life can be an excellent way of learning. It does depend on a number of things, of course. Firstly, you've got to find a competent teacher, and you've also got to find a competent teacher that can actually teach, because there's a very big difference between doing and being able to teach. So you need to find both of these things in the same place. Now, what's available is often a problem. I certainly had to travel all the way to Japan. It's now not so necessary because a lot of the Nawashi are now coming over to Europe and the US and lots of other places. So it's becoming a lot more accessible, but certainly when I started, the only option really was to spend a few £1,000 going out to Japan and seeing somebody like Asada Steve or whoever out there. Not everybody's lucky enough to have an Asada Steve or Kinoko next door to them, so that's a problem. If you are lucky enough to have somebody who's been properly trained by these people, all well and good, but the chances are you haven't got anybody nearby, and secondly, it's still not going to be cheap. People generally want decent recompense when they've invested it in taking a lot of expensive lessons from top Japanese Nawashi. And so that brings us really to the whole other area. Really from that end of the scale, one-to-one teaching goes right down to people who are probably only one page ahead in the book from you. But they've had a couple of classes, so they think that they're now qualified to teach. I suppose at best they might well be very able to repeat steps if they've got a good memory. But really what teaching, at least as far as we're concerned, is all about is the nuance, not just teaching something by rote, teaching the why and the wherefore, teaching the tricks and the shortcuts and the more efficient and effective ways of doing things. And so, yeah, it's a very mixed bag. And of course, the less you know, the more difficult it is to judge whether you're getting the right teaching. So, really, yes, it's a question of cost, availability, convenience, and so on. So that moves on to the next option, which is group classes, where they range from things like some very good workshops run by top riggers, and especially the Japanese guys who come over who really know their stuff. Those can be quite expensive and can run from 2 to possibly even 5 days. At the other end of the scale, you've got the sort of peer rope events, small club events and so on, where again you might well have somebody very competent coming and teaching a small group, or it could be just somebody who knows something standing up and showing something simple in front of a very large group. So the degree of attention you get, the degree of detail that you can go into, how much opportunity there is to ask questions, all these sorts of things can be very variable. I've seen a number of different examples. I remember one example where there was a tutorial given at a large festival event, and the guy got up there. Somebody had been tying for many years in sort of general bondage mainly, and he started demonstrating a beginner's tie, wrist tie, which was effectively a single column tie, but with without going underneath the wraps. So in other words, it was the typical beginner's mistake of secondary tightening. Because it was quite an informal event and I was sitting near the front, when he passed near me, I did whisper to him, are you going to show the safety version? At that, he went totally berserk and threw me out of the presentation, even though nobody could hear. So there's that on one hand. I can think of another example where I was at a pier rope. There was a guy tying a very nice two-rope TK, if I remember correctly, in front of the audience, and doing a very good job teaching. And the problem was that there were people there. I was standing at the back. I could see somebody doing something that bore little resemblance to what he was actually doing on stage. And it's quite possible he'll turn up at the next rope event saying, oh, yes, I've learnt a TK. I learnt it at the last event I was at. So there are those problems. And I think with things like tying TKs, gotos, whatever you like to call them, there's an awful lot of devil in the detail. It's very easy, as I often say, to tie something that looks like a plane but doesn't fly like a plane. So, yeah, you need to, again, have a balance there. You can be lucky. You can also find, a number of disadvantages, like, for example, you can't ask the guy up at the front to keep repeating something if you don't get it. There's a stage where you feel stupid doing it, and indeed you might be inhibited from asking a lot of sensible questions because you don't want to appear stupid in front of a group. So yeah, they've got their pros and cons. Oh, another point that it occurred to me about after having been to a number of workshops that have lasted several days, really is what you can take out of it that's relevant. Sometimes you learn an awful lot, other times you sift through what you've actually learnt and you go, well, I've just spent X £100 or dollars or whatever, and really all I've learnt is a new pattern. And a couple of tips. So they can, if they're not spot on targeted to you, they can end up as being quite expensive for the actual value you get. In general, I think another problem with real life tuition is that very often it's easy to forget. And you get home and you suddenly think, now, did that go left to right or right to left? And then you've got no opportunity really to follow up and ask that question. So unless they've provided a lot of aid memoirs, notes, and so on to support the class, it can be a bit of a problem. The other thing that I see a lot of people doing now is they're glued to their smartphone, videoing the whole thing. Now, I know very well that when I'm videoing stuff, I pay very little attention to what's going on apart from the actual act of videoing. So, in most cases, they might as well be watching a video in the first place. I don't know, maybe that's a matter of opinion. You can also miss things when you're there taking notes and things. And very often it might be that really important thing that you needed to know. So that's a little bit of a worry. What other options are there? Well, obviously the one that's been with us since the very start and predates the internet is books. And books can be very useful. You've got the ability to go back and refer to things time and time again. That's great. The problem is that I've found with some of the tying illustrations in books is that it can be a little bit difficult to work out what the steps are in between sometimes, how you get from A to B, if there aren't enough detailed illustrations. And Very often they won't be that close up, so you don't see the nuances, and most importantly, you don't see how the person's using their hands, how they're handling the rope. Because if you want to tie in any way other than purely mechanically, you need to see how people are using the rope, and you need to be able to use it efficiently, because otherwise you're there fumbling around, and that's not really very sexy, or dominant for that matter. And the other thing with books, and it's the same with videos or DVDs, is they're kind of set in stone. Unless you do an entire reprint, it's very difficult to correct anything, clarify anything, add to things. And the point with shibari is that it's moving so fast. When I started, we knew nothing. Even 5 years ago, the knowledge was relatively limited compared to what it is now. The standards have increased tremendously, and the knowledge has increased tremendously. So something that you might have printed a year or two ago, there'll be new information coming out already. I mean, we found it with some of the tutorials we've shot. Very often we've gone back to them a few months later and made additions or corrections, because it literally moves that fast. So, it's a question of keeping current. And again, you can't ask a book a question. If something's not clear, well, you could email the author, I guess, but whether you get a reply is another matter. It can be very, very difficult. So the next thing this brings me on to is videos. And obviously videos is the medium that we're using. But again, not all things are equal with video. There's a big difference between a very basic video that you might get on YouTube. Generally speaking, they don't show an awful lot of detail. Most of them shot single camera on a tripod, set up from some distance. So you don't always see all the details. And more often than not, they tend to be a step-by-step demonstration rather than a description of how and why, and indeed how you should tie that in a real life situation. There's a big difference between how you tie something if you're demonstrating to an audience or a camera, and how you'll tie if you're in your bedroom or wherever. So there's that aspect. Again, you don't know the provenance, you don't know in other words, the competence of the rigger in question, unless of course you know their reputation. So it can often be a question of the blind leading the blind. They have, of course, a lot of advantages over things like books, and indeed, to a large extent, over real life tuition, because, again, like a book, you can revise. If you've forgotten something, you can pick up your book again, flip through the pages. Same with the video, you can go back, you can replay it. Of course, the big advantage of a video is that it's probably shot at 25, 30 frames or whatever per second. So what that means is you get upwards of a couple of dozen pictures every second. Now a book, you're only going to get one picture every minute or two. So you miss a lot of detail. With a video, you can see how people's hands move. You can see examples of the difference between tying for a tutorial and tying for a session. You can actually see video examples of those. You can see how people's hands move, the way they move the rope. And I think you can also learn a lot of things like tension. People say you can't learn tension. I disagree, because you can see how the rope sits on the flesh. You can see the amount of depression in the flesh caused by the rope. You can see how easily it pulls away. Okay, it's not as accurate as actually feeling it yourself, but of course, even in a group class, the chances are that you might not get to feel the tension of a properly tied version anyway, because you'll be stood at the back. Of course, the other good thing about videos is that, at least online ones, as opposed to video cassettes or DVDs or whatever, online ones can be edited. Of course, hard copy has the same problem as books. It's exactly that, it's hard copy, so you can't easily update it. You've got to re-record the whole damn lot, which is not really convenient. So you can end up with a little bit of a piecemeal situation. If you're on YouTube, of course, there may be a reluctance to replace the video because you've already got dozens of likes and thousands of views. So for that reason, one might choose not to take a video down. So you might get very outdated content. I think another surprising thing is, to the people who say, well, you can't teach things by video, just take a look around the internet and see the things you can learn by video. And there are videos on how to land a Cessna. There are videos on medical procedures. I'm not suggesting that you should necessarily learn to land a Cessna from a YouTube video, but I think that it's quite possible that you could learn purely from the video. It certainly would be a lot better than learning it from a book or someone who didn't know what they were doing, I suspect. Of course, as I say, they're not generally used exclusively, and I don't really even suggest that our tutorials should be used exclusively, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So, what other options are there? Well, the other option is one that really pulls most of these other means of teaching together into one place, and that's using multimedia. So in other words, with multimedia, you've not only got video, you can have annotations, which obviously YouTube can give you. You can also have text, just like a book. So you can either have pages of written text, links to PDFs or ebooks, anything you like. We can also have quizzes to test your knowledge. We can also attach a forum for detailed discussion. Again, admittedly, you can have comments on a YouTube video. But what we can also do with our system is we can very easily edit videos. We can add to videos. We can put additional material up. Again, that's something you can't do with a lot of platforms like YouTube. Yes, you might be able to link to videos, but you wouldn't have the whole tutorial in one place. And I think that's where we score with the platform that we have, and the fact that it is designed specifically for teaching with tens of thousands of students, probably hundreds of thousands of students worldwide. So it's a very good platform to do what it says on the label. Now, what's the ideal solution? I'm not saying necessarily that multimedia tutorials such as we do on Shibari classes are the answer to everything. I think that the best solution is combining the two. Combining real-life tuition with the preparation and the revision and the practice and the filling in the gaps that tutorials like ours can provide. Because when you go to a class, if you've practiced some of the things already, you can progress more quickly and you'll be able to ask far better questions because you've already run into some of the queries or difficulties or questions that you would already have from doing some initial practice. The other thing is that tutorials such as ours will also provide you with revision. There's nothing worse than spending a whole load of money on competent, excellent tuition and then getting home and going like, how the hell did he do that? Did he go this way? Did he go that way? What did he say about this? If you can just refer back to a video It's great. You can play it as many times as you like, you can play it as slowly as you like, and nobody's going to laugh at you and say you're being slow. Uh, you're not going to then waste hours and hours and hours practicing the wrong thing. There's nothing more depressing than having a student come back after a week or two going, "Oh, I've been practicing. Okay, let's see what you can do." And you see them start to do whatever it is they've been practicing, and you realise they've spent hours practicing the wrong damn thing, and they've ingrained this mistake into their muscle memory. The important thing, I think, with shibari is to build on really good foundations. And the more you know about the techniques, the better you can use them. It's not just following a set of steps, it's not just repeating parrot fashion. It's all about how you do it, and I think you can see this in videos. You can see the passion, you can see the emphasis, you can see the punctuation, if you like, and all these things which make tying more than just paint by numbers. I think it's such a shame to miss that part of tying. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we believe in shibari classes and the ingredients-based approach. If you haven't heard that before, what I mean is we prefer to teach about the components, the ingredients that make up the ties, or as we term them, recipes, because a lot of the ingredients are very similar. They perform a function. And although they might look different, as long as they perform the same function, they're usually interchangeable. And once you understand that, the whole art of shibari becomes a lot more simple. You're not having to learn 60 odd steps of a tie in a just by rote manner, like learning a bunch of dates in history or something at school. You understand why you're doing the things, and that's important. If you understand why you're doing something, it becomes logical. And if you understand why you're doing something, you can spot when it's wrong. And if you can spot when it's wrong, you become safer because you can spot your own mistakes. It's back to what I said. It's all very well making something that looks like a plane, but if you don't understand, for example, that the components need to be light, they need to be strong, it's going to drop out of the sky. And it's the same with tying. If you don't understand that, for example, a friction is generally a friction, in other words, it doesn't matter which friction particularly you use to close, say, the first wrap of a gote, as long as it does what it's supposed to do. And what it's supposed to do is to keep that secure. Friction is no more than nuts and bolts, if you like, if you want to make an engineering analogy. It doesn't matter the thread of the nut and bolt particularly, as long as it's strong enough for the job concerned. It might not matter the material. Sometimes it does matter the material. And it's the same with ties and frictions and the way you build these things and the ingredients. Sometimes they matter, sometimes it doesn't matter which one you use. And it's important to know these things. When you know all of these things, you become creative. And the whole thing doesn't become this great mystery of steps you have to perform but with no real knowledge of why you're doing them. And I think the ingredients approach, understanding those ingredients, is probably the most important thing you can learn. That and how to apply them properly. Because you don't get stuck in a cul-de-sac. It's a bit like cookery. You know, if you know that a recipe that calls for sugar can use almost anything sweet to achieve the purpose, you're not stuck when you go to the larder and find you've got no sugar. And it's the same with tying. You're able to think your way out of situations, you're able to be more reactive, impulsive, passionate. You just have the right solution by instinct when you understand what the components do. It also helps you develop as a rigger rather than just somebody with a repertoire of ties. So I hope that makes some sense to you, and I hope that you can see that good tutorials with enough depth, competence, and so on can be a tremendous benefit to your learning and the growth of how you tie. So anyway, we'll be back with something else shortly. Bye for now.